Good evening. Well, this is my first time speaking at a conference, so I hope you all will say a quick prayer for me. It's a great honor to be here. Although I dreaded coming up here and doing this, it's a great honor because every good thing in my life has come to me because of Our Lady of Medjugorje. So this is a great honor for me to come here and be able to say thank you to her publicly. Just a brief introduction. I'm the father of 4 children, like he said. I'm one of 10 myself. My wife, my 4 children, we're all very devout Catholics today, but it wasn't always that way. My father is a convert. And we grew up in Iowa in the Midwest, and we were kind of Bible Belt Catholics. And the thing that some Bible Belt Catholics have is that they have a strong dislike, Bible Belt Christian. And the thing that some Bible Belt Christians have a dislike for is Catholics, as you might know. And all my relatives, my parents, everyone in Iowa, had a dislike for the Catholic Church. So my father moved to California, and he began a job in a big national corporation. And in this corporation, he had for his boss a man who was over the entire United States, very successful man. And he admired this guy greatly. His name was Bert Bride. Bert Bride was a devout Catholic. He had a 6th grade education, but he loved St. Therese, and he loved his Catholic faith. And my dad, although he didn't like his Catholicism, he admired this man named Bert Bride very much. He admired him so much that he would come home and tell us as kids stories about this man, what a great man he was, what honor, and how honest he was, and things like that. Well, one day, Bert Bride called my dad into his office. My dad was worried, and Bert Bride said to him, "We may leave here and never be friends again, but I'm willing to take that chance." And my father thought he was maybe going to be fired. So he went in, and Bert Bride looked at him and said, my father's name is Dave also. He said, "Dave, I just want you to know that I represent the one true faith. I'm Roman Catholic. And if you can prove me wrong, I'll join your church. But if I prove I'm right, you have to become a Catholic. Do we have a deal?" And he put his hand out, and my father, he's pretty cantankerous, not one to back away from a challenge. He said, "Okay, we got a deal. How do you want to do this?" Well, Bert Bride handed him a couple of books, and one of them was The Story of a Soul about St. Therese. Many of you, I'm sure, have read that. My father began to read that book, and at this time, he had 5 children. I was the oldest of the 5 children. He read that book, and he had never read anything so profound, filled with so much depth and love and faith. And from that book, my father realized that he had been missing something in his life. So he told my mother. They began to study the Catholic faith, and a short time later, my mother and father and 5 children were baptized Catholics. That was December 22nd, a number of years ago. Well, then they went on to become even better Catholics and had 5 more children. At the time, my mother was pregnant with number 6, and she had already picked out the name. And my dad argued with her. He wanted her to change the name to Teresa, after St. Therese. And my mother, she would only assent to the middle name being Teresa. So my sister's name was Valerie Teresa. Well, then right away my mother got pregnant again, and my dad won. And so we had our little Teresa. Teresa, she died on her, she was 8 years old. Near her 8th birthday, she died. Her appendix burst. And it's amazing. She was the most special child in our family. You know how you can have kids and everyone is unique, but there's one that's just so full of joy and life and happiness. All our relatives would come over there and they'd want to see my little sister, Teresa. She was special. And she was taken away, and it did something to my family. My family, it was like you took a little piece of the heart out of my family. My mother was never the same after that. She was a terrific mom, but something was missing in her life ever since my little sister Teresa died. Well, we all were put into Catholic schools at that time. We went through Catholic grammar school, high school, university. I went to University of Santa Clara. And what happened was we became products of the world, products of our culture. We were cafeteria Catholics. We probably picked and choose what we did, what we believed in, what we didn't believe in. We didn't always go to Mass on Sunday. Although my dad was a daily communicant, even he, from priests, friends, and others, he kind of fell away from the teachings of the church. It was okay just to be a good person. And our family lost its Catholicism. If you ask us, what faith are you, we would have said we were Catholic. But in reality, we were people of the United States. We were products of this culture. Well, I got married very young. Like one of our earlier speakers, my wife was 17 and I was 19. We got married very young. We have 4 children. And my sole goal in life was to be successful, was to make money. And that's what I set out to do. Worked like crazy, was successful, drove a big fancy car and had a car phone and made a lot of money and very successful. My dad and I went into partnership together. We founded a chain of ice cream parlors. Things seemed to be going great. But there was just something missing. And one day I read in a newspaper about a retreat that was being offered. And this retreat was a 5-day silent retreat. Well, I wasn't a faithful Catholic, really. But I decided, you know what, that's something I've never done. And somehow there was a tug in my heart to go on this retreat. So I went 5 days, silence. And each morning I'd meet with the Jesuit priest who was directing me. And something happened to where all of a sudden I prayed. My prayer after those 5 days was, Dear Lord, help me to be a better person. You know, when you're not living the truth, you know, when you're a person of compromise. I was a person I could tell lies and not worry about it. Compromise. I was duplicitous. I just wasn't good. If somebody looked at me from the outside, they would think, boy, look at that successful man. He's got 4 children, a beautiful family. But inside, I wasn't a good person. In fact, I felt kind of dirty. And at this retreat, I prayed, Dear Lord, just help me to be a better person. Well, right after that, we began to have business troubles. And the first thing that happened was our big franchise, our ice cream parlor franchise. We had 30 stores. We had a couple of failures, and we had some major lawsuits. It resulted in us having to file bankruptcy. My father lost his home. I lost my home. We lost our business. It continued from there. We were in the newspapers every day. We had a real public business in Northern California. People knew who we were. And every day it seemed like there was an article about my family in the paper, so we were publicly kind of embarrassed. Having no money, taken before courts. People filed lawsuits against us for fraud and things like that. Well, we couldn't get away from it. Even filing bankruptcy, you can't discharge fraud. And so here we were caught up in all these lawsuits, problems. On top of that, at this time, I injured myself. I was an athlete. I loved playing sports. I injured myself and had a serious accident with my leg, and I was in crutches for 3.5 months. So I move out of my home, move my family into an apartment. I have no job. Have no income, no source of income, injure my knee, and I think, oh my gosh, what could be worse, you know, these lawsuits. And then my wife comes to me and she says, you know what, I don't think I love you anymore. And I thought, oh my gosh, I could bear pretty much anything. The whole time all these problems kept happening, I would say, at least I have my family. And my wife, through all these troubles, it put a lot of strain on us, and she didn't want to be married. So here I have these 4 children, and I moved out. I lived alone for 6 months. I prayed a lot. Even though I wasn't a very good person, I still believed there was a God. And about this time, I found a new job. Things started going better. I finally kind of came around home again and moved back in, although things were very tentative. And at this time, it's funny how you look back and you see how God's hand, that prayer that I prayed, "Dear Lord, help me be a better person," right after that, everything in my life was taken. Every single thing that I thought was important was taken. So all of a sudden, I run into this man at a swim meet. You know how on Saturday afternoons you have swim meets if you have children, and you go sit and you watch your kids swim? Well, I'm sitting at a swim meet, and I run into this man that I knew very well. He was an attorney, very successful attorney in Sacramento, and I had seen him recently in the bars. He would, I'd go there Friday afternoon on the way home from work with my friends to have a beer and then go home, and I would see this attorney sitting in there, and he'd been sitting in there all day. And he was, flirting with the women, and I heard that he had left his wife and kids, and he was just on a downward spiral. And, I felt a lot of compassion for him because I almost felt like I could be in the same place he was, even though I was finally back in my home. And I run into him at a swim meet. Hadn't seen him for maybe a month, a couple months, and he walks up to me, and I didn't recognize him. He had this look on his face like I'd never seen. It was the most peaceful, content, joyful, happy look, carefree. I looked at him and I didn't recognize him, and I said, his name was Dave, and I said, "Dave, is that you?" And he said, "Yes, it's me." I said, "You look wonderful. You look terrific. What's happened?" Because the last time I'd seen him, he's sitting in a bar. And he said, "Oh, I took a pilgrimage. I went to this place called Medjugorje." And I said, "A pilgrimage? What religion are you?" And he said, "Well, I'm Catholic." And I said, here all this time I'd known him. That tells you how important my faith was. I had no idea that this friend was a Catholic. And I said, "You're a Catholic? I'm a Catholic too." And he said, "Well, have you ever heard of Fatima?" I said, "Yes, I have." He said, "Well, it's like that, only it's happening today. It's happening right now. The Blessed Virgin Mary is appearing to these young people in Yugoslavia." And I was very interested. I said, "Wow, that's great," because it always seems like these things happened years ago. The great saints and all the stories we hear about miracles and things, it always seems like it happened in some other time. It never happens now to us. So I was very curious, and I said, "Well, tell me about it." Well, he began to tell me about all the miracles. Boy, these things turn gold, and the sun spins, and you should see. And I took a step backwards, and I said, "Wow, that's really neat, Dave." And running through my mind, I'm thinking, oh, this poor guy's gone from this end of the pendulum to this one. The guy's a religious kook. So I thanked him, and I walked away. And I went home and told my wife, I said, "That poor Dave, he's lost it. The guy's crazy." But all week long, the thought of his face, because he couldn't make that up. That isn't something that he could contrive. And I kept thinking about him, and I kept thinking about these apparitions. And here comes the next Saturday, next swim meet, and I was anxiously looking forward to finding Dave. So I began looking all over, and I saw his son, and I said, "Is your dad here?" He says, "Oh, yeah, he's over there." So I found myself rushing up to him. Isn't that funny? Rushing up to him, and I said, "Dave, you got to tell me more about these apparitions, this thing going on in Medjugorje." And so he handed me a little pamphlet. He said, "I thought I might run into you today." Well, I sat there that whole swim meet, and I just devoured this pamphlet. And all of a sudden I knew I had to go. The thought that ran through my mind was, what if I was alive 2,000 years ago and somebody came to me and they told me about this guy that might be the Messiah that was working miracles? What would I have done? Would I have been a person to seek him out, to seek out the truth? Or would I have just been content and said, oh yeah, maybe he is, and been fine with my life? And the thought that kept coming to me was, I hope that I would be able to say, I would seek you out, Lord. I want to know the truth. And with that thought in mind, I came home and I told my wife, let's take a vacation. Well, we still weren't on the greatest terms. And she says, well, I don't want to go to some communist country. That's crazy. And she says, let's go somewhere fun like Hawaii. And I said, no, I really want to go to this place. I really want to go. And finally she said, fine, just go. So I called some travel agent on the phone, bought a ticket, and I was gone in a week. Got on the airplane, just showed up by myself. And as most of you who've been there, I saw the sign of hands the other day, how many people have been to Medjugorje. As most of you know, if you go there seeking, Our Lady gives you a great gift. Well, on the airplane, because of my Protestant background, all my relatives being Protestant, I had a fear that I was going to offend God, perhaps. And so the whole way on the airplane, I kept saying, Dear Lord, I'm not trying to worship Mary. I just want to know the truth. Please forgive me if I offend you. But I just wanted to know the truth. So I get to Medjugorje. I'm there 3 days. And after 3 days, I was so disappointed. It was beautiful. People from every country in the world, every evening, all these different groups gathered and sang songs, Germans, Italians, French. It was terrific. It was an oasis. But I didn't go there for that. I wanted to know the truth, whatever that was. And so after 3 days, I became somewhat disappointed. I thought, I came all this way. Didn't ask for any miracles. I just wanted to know the truth. And I was kind of depressed. So I go to the evening rosary that night. And as I'm praying the rosary, I'm kneeling next to some other American that I met who became a friend. And as I'm praying, I look down and my silver rosary turned gold right in front of my eyes. And I thought, oh my gosh. But then I thought, you know what? Maybe they make trick rosaries over here. I was a skeptic. I thought maybe they changed color with the heat of your hand or something. But I kind of pushed it over towards this guy sitting next to me, and I said, what do you see? And he said, I said, what color is this rosary? And he says, well, it's black. The beads are black. And I go, no, the chain. He says, it's gold. Well, even then I didn't believe. I thought, I don't know, what does that mean? So the next day, I ran into a group of Americans who were talking, and I kind of idle up next to them because it's always nice to hear somebody speaking your language. And I heard them saying that they were going to see Maria. And they had a private appointment with her at her home, and she was going to talk to them. And I thought, oh my gosh. And all of a sudden, somebody looks at me and says, would you like to join us? I said, oh yes, I really would. So we went to her home, and it was here I thought, I'm going to know the truth. You can see miracles, and you can see all kinds of other things, but really you see the truth in a person. And that's what I found out how Medjugorje spreads too, is people come home and they have this gift that people see something in them that they desire. Well, I'm watching Maria, and I thought, I'm going to be able to tell if she's a fraud. I'm going to be able to tell if she has ulterior motives or if she's in this for herself. I'm going to look at the way she's dressed, the way she speaks. So here we are, and these Americans begin to take pictures of her, and she puts her head down. And the interpreter says, Maria asked that you put your camera down. And I thought, yeah, come on, you silly Americans, what are you doing? And Maria said, you didn't come here to take my picture. You came here to hear Our Lady's words. And I thought, well, that's a good sign. So she begins to speak again, and these Americans pull out their cameras and start taking her pictures again. And I was a little embarrassed. She put her head down, looking very sad, and waited, and then she began to speak, and she said some of the most profound things that I had never heard, things that a saint might say. And I watched her, and she genuinely wanted us to hear the message. She wanted to impart this to us. It was so important to her. She was sincere, and she had the same look as my friend Dave. Peace, contentment, joy. Then somebody asked her, "How often do you pray?" And she kind of smiled, and she said, "Well, I've made my entire life a prayer to God." And at that minute, I couldn't take anymore. I turned around, and I walked away, and I knew that it was true. I knew these messages in Medjugorje were true. And I was confronted with the fact that I hadn't been living that kind of life. All of a sudden, when you see beauty and then you look at yourself, and maybe it's a little bit of how we're going to see ourselves in heaven when we confront our Lord. But all of a sudden, I was overcome with shame, real shame. I was very happy to see or to know that this was true, but I was so overcome with shame that I wanted to be alone, and I went out, and they have a little graveyard, a little cemetery out behind, and I went out there, and all of a sudden I started to cry, and I never cried. In fact, I always prided myself that all the other kids in school cried. I never cried. I was tough. I couldn't stop crying. I cried for 2 hours, and I was so happy nobody was there. I cried so hard that I couldn't stand up. And I saw how I looked, and the thought came to me that if I had died then, that the world would not be a better place because of me being here. In fact, it would probably be worse, that I hadn't really made any great contribution, any contribution at all to making the world better. I was a taker. I was in it for myself. Even with my family, my wife, my relationships, it was about me. And I was overcome with shame. And so I prayed a prayer. Dear Lord, if you want me to be different, you got to do it, because I've broken every promise I ever made, every New Year's resolution I ever made. I never kept it. So if you want me to be different, you'll have to change me. But I'd like to be different. So anyway, my trip from then on was terrific. It was just wonderful. I saw many other miracles. I met many wonderful people. I didn't want to leave. But then on the way home, I thought, oh no, I'm on the airplane, and I prayed, Dear Lord, please don't make me a religious fanatic. So I get home, and all I could think about was I wanted to pray, and I wanted to read, and I wanted to learn my faith. And can you imagine what this did to my wife? She wasn't in the same place I was. She wasn't in the same place I was before. And all of a sudden, I saw with different eyes. I'd see the movies my children were watching, and I'd say, oh my gosh, why are we watching these things? I never realized before. I watched television, the books, the magazines laying around the home. And so slowly I kind of started trying to remove these influences, these bad influences from my house. And I tried to incorporate the messages of Our Lady, prayer, very slowly, not pushing it, very slowly. I began to go to daily mass, began to attend a rosary group, started a rosary group, and my life for me became wonderful. I'd never had such peace, such joy, knowing that I was doing what was right, knowing that our faith is true. But what happened was, it drove a wedge even further between my wife and I. She became so angry that just seeing a medal around my neck, get that off. Why are you wearing that? That's embarrassing. What are people going to say? I tried to put a crucifix up in our home. In Medjugorje, Our Lady says, put a crucifix up, put the scriptures out. Well, I tried to put a crucifix. My wife says that people are going to think we're strange. You're not putting that in our living room. And I realized how far my family was from where it should be. And it became so bad that I knew that our relationship wasn't going to happen. And then one day my wife came in swearing. If you knew my wife, she's a little 5'2", 100 pounds, I'm 250 or 60. She came in there, had me so scared, yelling, screaming, profanity. She's the most gentle person normally, and I felt like somebody, invasion of the body snatchers. Somebody had taken over my wife's body, and she was so angry, get rid of this religious stuff. Why are you going to Mass every day? You're pushing this on our children. And my wife was so angry that I remember we have a kind of a big walk-in closet. And I remember standing in the closet, putting my head down, thinking, have I done the wrong thing? I tried to be gentle, but even if you're gentle, they know. Somebody who's close to you knows that you're different. And I thought, have I done the wrong thing? I could easily make my wife feel more comfortable by getting rid of all the things, quit going to Mass, take my medal off, do that. And I remember asking God, do I look to my marriage and get rid of these things, even though in my heart I love you? Or do I continue doing what I know is right? And I said, you know what, I'm going to give this to you, Blessed Mother. You were a mother, and I'm going to give this to you. If you want me to be divorced, then I will be divorced. I'll live forever. I'll give everything I have to my wife, all the money, anything I make. I don't want anything for myself. I'll give it to you. I'll give to my wife, but I will do this for you, Lord. Whatever you want, I accept. Well, a few days later, I had been going to this prayer group, and I had met some young people in the prayer group, although I didn't know them very well. And I had resolved that it got so bad with my wife that what I was going to do is give her freedom. I wanted to come to her and say, here's the divorce papers. You can have everything. You can have your freedom. I don't want to make your life miserable. I'm sorry. And so the day I was going to do that was a sad day. I got up in the morning. My heart was so heavy I could hardly even get to work. And all morning I knew that I was going at noon to get those divorce papers. Well, about 9 o'clock, I get a call, and it's from some guy in the prayer group. I didn't know him very well. In fact, I just recently met him. And he said, hey, can I meet with you this morning? And I said, no, today's a bad day. He said, well, I'd really like to meet with you this morning. Do you have a few minutes? I said, no, really, today's not a good day. What do you have in mind here? I didn't even know the guy well enough to even know what he did for business, why he was calling me. And he said, well, I have a message to give you. And I said, a message? He goes, well, yeah, I have an envelope I need to give you. And I said, an envelope? Why do you need to give me an envelope? Well, he says, there's a young girl in the prayer group, and she told me that I had to give this to you this morning. And I said, this is kind of strange. So I said, well, I'll meet you at the park. I didn't want anybody to see us. So I drove over to the park, and here's this great big guy, walks up, and he has this little white envelope sealed, and he hands it to me. And I said, tell me again what happened. And he goes, well, there was a girl in the prayer group who you met, and I barely remembered her. And he said, she was awakened in the middle of the night. She has a special gift. Our Lady speaks to her heart. This girl was about 21 or 22 years old. And I said, okay. Well, she was awakened in the middle of the night and wrote this message for you. And I said, for me? I don't even know her. So anyway, I opened the letter, and I don't remember exactly what it says. My daughter Kimberly keeps it. My oldest daughter keeps this letter. But it said something like, my dear son, I have seen what you've suffered. I have seen that you've given your life to good. You've consecrated your family to me. And sorry, I get a little emotional still. And it was the most loving, wonderful letter, if you believe it, from my Heavenly Mother. And she said, have no fear, for your family is important to God. and God will not allow your family to fall apart. Well, anyway, here I am sitting with this big guy, and the tears just start running from my eyes. And they still do, huh? And I had such hope all of a sudden. So I took that letter, and I went home, and I had hope, and I just believed with all my heart that things were going to be okay. Well, my wife, all of a sudden, these bad things start happening to my wife. She has her brand new Suburban stolen out of the driveway. It was kind of her pride and joy, a status symbol. When all the moms show up at school, she had her big Suburban. It was stolen. And then a short time later, within a day or two, she's working at our ice cream parlor in the evening, closing up, and two masked men come in. They have the employees lie down. They take my wife in the back room, and they grab her hair, and they throw her down. They put a gun in her face, tell her to open the safe. Very traumatic. And then within a day after that, she's sitting on the floor, and my daughter is curling my wife's hair, and my wife is sitting on the floor, and my daughter's standing over her. And my wife looks up to take the curling iron, reaches up, and my daughter dropped it on her eye. And it burned her eye, and so she thought she might lose the sight in her eye. All these things happened, one after the other, until my wife comes to me and she said, I don't want to live anymore. She says, I have no joy, I have no happiness, I'm in darkness, and you always seem so happy, no matter how badly I treat you. And I said, well, I get great strength from going to Mass every day. That's just the only answer that popped out. Well, a few days further was Lent. Oh, I forgot to tell you one thing. I'm praying in church. My wife wanted to die. She said she wanted to run her car into a pole. So I'm praying in church. And I think it was the Feast of Mary, Mother of God, January 1. I'm praying, and after Mass, everybody's left. I'm all by myself. I look around and make sure nobody's around in case I started crying. Because after going to Medjugorje, I cry a little easier. It's kind of funny. I'm all alone, and so I began to pray. Dear Lord, why are all these problems happening? I don't understand. My wife is miserable. My family's miserable. She wants to kill herself. And I'm really praying, and all of a sudden there's a tap on my shoulder, and some lady is in the church. And I had just looked around, and there was nobody there, and this lady taps me. Had no idea who she was. And she smiles, and she says, all those problems that you're worried about, those are God's answers to your prayers. She turns around and walks away. And I said, that's weird. All these bad things are God's answers. I wasn't very far advanced in the spiritual life, you can tell. So guess what? About a month goes by, February. It's starting Lent, and we're sitting around the dinner table. And even though my wife didn't want to hear about faith, I always talked to my children. I gave them things to read. I would go in at night and pray with them. If they were too old and they didn't want to pray, I would pray out loud for them. I'd let them hear my prayer to God. I'd say things like, Dear Lord, help my daughter become a great saint, and help her to be strong, and help her to be holy. And I would let my daughter hear this. I'd make the sign of the cross on her forehead. So even if they were a little too old, my daughter was about 14, I still prayed for them out loud. I wanted to incorporate prayer in their life. And so my kids, they took to it. And even though my wife didn't, and so we're sitting around the dinner table, and I say to my children, what are you guys going to give up for Lent? What kind of sacrifice are we going to make? And I knew that would just set my wife off, but I just took the chance. And one said, I'm going to give up chocolate, and another said something else. Each one said something, and so I said, well, I'm going to do this. And I didn't say anything to my wife, and my wife goes, well, aren't you going to ask me what I'm going to do? And I took a deep breath, and I said, what are you going to do? She says, I'm going to go to daily Mass. Well, I tried hard holding onto the seat so I didn't fall off the chair. I didn't say a word. I just said, oh, that's nice. That's nice. Well, anyway, my wife, she's tough. She's tough. And she went every single day in Lent. Her life changed. She began to be happy. Our relationship improved. She was just something in her began to change. And so here come right before Easter, and I tell all my children, I said, hey, there's a penance service where there's going to be 10 priests up at the church, and they're all going to hear confessions to prepare us for Easter. Would you guys like to go with me? And my kids said, oh, Dad, we went in school this week. My wife goes, I think I'd like to go. Well, my wife hadn't been to confession I don't think she'd been to confession since her first confession, probably. And I said, okay. And so that evening we drove over there and I prayed the whole way. God, give her the strength to do this. Well, she went to confession. She went in, her face was white. She was taking deep breaths. She went in and she encountered a most wonderful priest. He was so gentle and kind. She came out sobbing. So we're driving home, and I said, you've been given a great gift, and make sure you protect that, because the devil will try to take away this peace that you have now. And she looks at me, why do you have to ruin everything? Yeah. 3 steps forward, 2 back. So, anyway, that night, 1 o'clock in the morning, my wife wakes me up, hysterical. Someone's in the house. Someone's in the house. David, wake up. Someone's in the house. I go, I didn't hear anything. She goes, yeah, I heard the door slam. I said, the door? I didn't hear the door. She goes, yeah, someone's in the house. And she's frantic, just about to tears. And she jumps up and turns on the lights, and she doesn't even wait for me to go see if there's somebody in the house. She just runs through the house, opening the doors, turning on the lights. She comes back, and she sits down in the bed, and she begins to just sob and sob. And when you have trouble at home, your prayer is deep, right? I had prayed for my wife every single day, offering whatever sacrifice I could. Whatever I could do. Well, anyway, here she is in the middle of the night, sobbing. And she said, I had the most real dream I've ever had. I said, dream? She goes, yeah, but I don't think it was a dream. I said, well, you want to tell me? She said, well, I was back in my father's house. And the sky was blue, and the clouds were white and fluffy, and the sun was out. She said there were flowers everywhere, and I was in my dad's house in his backyard. And she said, I was so happy. And I ran into his bedroom, and I was in my father's room, and all of a sudden, there was a banging on the door. And I looked, and there was this creature outside the door. The creature was ugly, gray, drawn skin. I couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman. It was so hideous. And it wanted in, and I wouldn't let it in. I wouldn't open the door to let it in. And she said the creature kept banging on the door, and I became so afraid. I didn't know what to do. And she said, all of a sudden I heard a woman's voice. And this woman said, you have nothing to fear, just pray. So my wife said, here she is in her father's room. She looks, and there on the nightstand is this little white ceramic lamb. She picks up this lamb, holds it to her heart, and begins to say, Mary had a little lamb. That was the only prayer she knew, probably. Mary had a little lamb. And she said, after she held this, she had the courage to open the door and scream, go away. And the creature grabbed the door and slammed the door and left. And that was the slamming of the door that woke my wife up. Well, for anybody who has an understanding of faith, that dream contains a lot of truth, doesn't it? Back in her father's home, she's just gone to confession. and Our Lady coming to protect her, the devil trying to get back in. Anyway, she didn't realize any of that, so I waited till the next morning to explain it. But anyway, the products of Medjugorje in my life. My wife today, I have to tell her to quit buying pictures of Our Lady. We have them in the closets and under the beds and saints everywhere. It's embarrassing. I know, it's wonderful. But my wife has whizzed by me in the spiritual life. She's the most saintly, holy person you'd ever see. Great mother. We have rosaries in our home. We have neighbors and friends come to the house. We have 40 or 50 people show up in our home. We do Bible studies and things like that. The fruits of Medjugorje have spread to my 10 brothers and sisters. They're all back in the faith. I want to tell you about some of the wonderful things that are products of Medjugorje. 10 years after I went to Medjugorje, I took my whole family. There, and they were touched. You know, they had been prepared by me, and they were touched, and my children then led 4 or 5 more pilgrimages to Medjugorje. They'd arranged it, and their friends and neighbors and family, so we've gone 5 or 6 times and taken groups of 40 or 50 people at a time and witnessed many, many conversions. You know, it's amazing how you can teach the truth, you can take people to church, you can have them read books, but they go to Medjugorje and they're converted. It's a great gift. Well, anyway, 10 years after, I was involved in a Marian conference that was being put on in Sacramento, my hometown. And I was just involved in kind of a small way, but afterwards we agreed to host a dinner in our home for all the people who had worked on the conference. You know, just a thank you dinner. You know how when the conference is over, there's a lot of tired folks, a lot of hours spent. So we had this dinner in my house. Well, one of the guests at the conference was Maria. So we have this dinner in my home, and people are showing up afterwards, and lo and behold, there's a knock on the door, and I open the door, and there is Maria from Medjugorje with her husband. And she came in, and we talked, we became friends, and then all of a sudden she said, "Do you have a crucifix or a statue of Our Lady?" And I said, "Well, sure." She goes, "Where can I have my apparition?" And I thought, oh my gosh. So Maria went into my living room, and we have a crucifix. Actually, it was from Medjugorje. And Maria knelt down, and all the guests that were in our home knelt down, and she had her apparition in my living room. And it wasn't till a few days later that I realized it was almost to the day that I was standing in front of her in Medjugorje 10 years before. So it was kind of a thank you from Our Lady, I think. It was a way of acknowledging. My father went to Mass every single day since he became Catholic many years ago. He never misses Mass. No matter where he is, if he's on a boat, he never misses Mass. He makes sure there's an airport that has a Mass. He won't miss Mass. But you know, he became kind of like I told you, kind of a product of the world. He started believing things that weren't Catholic, a lot of false teaching, and he was encouraging anybody to receive the Eucharist anytime. He just had he had embraced a lot of errors. And one of the things he had no desire to do was go to Medjugorje. I can pray to Our Lady right here. I can pray right here. I don't need to. I pray to her all the time, and I don't need to see miracles. I have faith. And he just was stubborn and would not go. And so here many years, 10, 12 years, all of a sudden my dad says, "I think I'm going to go to Medjugorje." And I said, "Well, I thought you didn't have to go." "I don't have to, but I want to. I just want to go by myself." I said, "Okay." He wouldn't even take my mother. anyway, my dad, he's there, and he is present for an apparition in Medjugorje. He's present for an apparition of Mariana. He's some distance away, and he sees the tears running down her face. And maybe father like son, he has to get away. He takes off walking away through the fields. And as he's walking, he looks up, and there's the miracle of the sun. And he falls on his knees. And you have to know my dad. My dad is the most stoic, stubborn person, never shows emotion. In fact, we know that he loves us kids. We know that he loves us, but he would never touch us or hug us or say, I love you. He would never say he's sorry. He's just different. Anyway, he comes home, and he said that he fell on his knees and cried for 20 minutes in Medjugorje looking at the miracle of the sun. And now my silly dad is worse than me. I've got a couple other stories I'd like to tell you. My sister and brother-in-law. My brother-in-law had a vasectomy. They had their 3 kids, and they had their number just right. They had 2 dogs, a cat, 3 kids, and a house and a car, and all the things they needed. My brother-in-law, Joe, I get him to go to Medjugorje with us on one of these trips. He's a cop, tough guy, lifts weights, big, tough policeman. He goes to confession in Medjugorje. And he goes in, and you know how tough some of those priests are over there in Medjugorje. They tell it like it is. Well, he confesses. He says, I have confessed this before, but it still bothers my conscience. I had a vasectomy. And the priest says, well, maybe God's telling you should do something about it. Oh, Father, he said, I don't have the money. I'm a policeman, and I got 3 kids, and I don't have the money. It's too expensive. And the priest says, well, let me tell you something. Do you know that every time you and your wife have relations, the devil sits at the head of your bed and mocks God? Pretty tough, huh? It was what my brother-in-law needed to hear, though. He said, Father, I'm going to do something about it. And the priest said, then I will help you. I'll dictate a tape for you to take home to your wife. So anyway, my sister and my brother-in-law have 2 more kids. They have 5 now. And they have a little statue out in their backyard. My brother-in-law built a shrine to Our Lady in the backyard. And they have their little kids go out and put a flower in the shrine of Our Lady to say thank you, because they wouldn't be there without her. There's so many stories, and I'm going to run out of time, but I want to tell you a couple of things. My daughter Kimberly, the oldest, she came here to Notre Dame, went to school, as did my son. Kimberly, she embraced the faith like no one I've ever seen. She is very, very smart. Everything she read, she knew. She remembered. Her memory was tremendous. She came here to Notre Dame, going to go into some kind of science or medicine, and pretty soon was taking theology and graduated here, I think summa cum laude, and got a scholarship and went to study in Europe, studied theology at an institute founded by Pope John Paul. And while she was here at Notre Dame, she and 3 companions, back up just a bit, I prayed like crazy that she would be protected coming here to Notre Dame. Notre Dame has some of the best in the world, right? But they also have some of the worst, I'm sad to say. And I prayed that my daughter would be protected from the bad teaching. Her first day here, she's kneeling in front of the Blessed Sacrament, and somebody comes up and puts a note on her book bag that said, would you like to join a prayer group we're starting called Children of Mary? So anyway, my daughter and 5 other friends got this little prayer group started. And when she graduated, it was 300 kids daily saying the rosary, going to Mass. They had, And she was proposed to 3 different times here at Notre Dame. And none of them seem right. Well, it's funny, all three of those guys are in the seminary to become priests now. So my daughter went to to Austria, studying in Austria. And she writes home and she says, Dad, I met this guy. He's wonderful in Austria. And I thought, oh no, a European. We'll never see her. And so I said, well, tell me about him. I said, describe him. Describe somebody that he reminds you of or that he's like, so I get an idea of who he is or what he's like. She says, Dad, he reminds me of Pope John Paul. And I thought, oh, I'm dead. Well, anyway, he was a Byzantine Catholic seminarian of the Byzantine Rite out of Slovakia. And my daughter, who was proposed to 3 times, ends up marrying a priest now. Or marries a seminarian. He was ordained a priest of the Byzantine Rite, and they live in Slovakia. Have 2 kids now. And then I'd like to just tell you quickly about my son, Jeremy. He came here to Notre Dame, was here 1 year, and began attending the prayer group that his sister was involved in. And Jeremy, if you know him, he was a rugby player and a football player, and he drank so much beer that I had to every kind of punishment you could think of I did, and I thought, this kid is never going to get it. Very good student, but just always in trouble, always. Comes here to Notre Dame, becomes active in the prayer group, begins praying the rosary, and he attends a retreat, and some sister, the Dominican Sisters of Mary, Mother of the Eucharist, is giving a retreat here, and she challenges these children, she says, or young people, she says, some of you know that God is calling you and you are not answering. Anyway, my son walked out of there, got on the phone, called me and said, Dad, don't renew my tuition next year. I know that I'm supposed to be a priest. And even though it may seem like our household is overly religious, I never tried to force religion on my children in any way. We had never spoken about this. And he said, Dad, I know it's a calling. I've had it for a long time. So I said, you know what, Jeremy, let's make sure that it's the right thing to do. I'm going to renew I'm going to pay your deposit for next year, and then you and I will spend the summer and we'll go visit seminaries. Because he had no idea of different orders, types of seminaries. So we spent the summer doing that. At the end of the summer, he signed up to be a priest for the Diocese of Sacramento. And he's just finishing his 8th year, 7th, 8th year, 4th year in Rome. And recently at the synod over in Rome, the synod they had on the Holy Eucharist, well, they convoked the ending of the synod. And Jeremy calls home and he said, Dad, they've chosen me to be the deacon for the Pope. And I said, oh my gosh. So he wrote a long letter home describing the event. We saw it, of course, on EWTN and have since gotten pictures. But he said he was vesting. He was vesting in the room where all these bishops, cardinals, priests all over the world, there were probably 200, 300 bishops. This is the end of the synod. And they all are dressing in white. And they hand my son Jeremy green. And he thought, green? Why am I wearing green? And then he looks through a door that's opened, and he sees the Pope kneeling, praying before the start of the ceremony in green. He was the Pope's deacon. So he writes a wonderful letter home how he got to kiss the papal altar. He got to bless the Holy Father with incense. Anyway, and as I'm watching that, all I could think of was my trip to Medjugorje and all the fruits that have come from Our Lady. And, she's a great mother. Every prayer that I have prayed has been answered. She has answered it. And it's been answered always not in the time I wanted and not in the way I wanted, but always better than I wanted. And, I hear people sometimes say, well, I can go to the Blessed Sacrament here. I don't need to go to Medjugorje. People don't need to do that. You can go to Mass. The Mass contains the greatest prayer to God, and that's true. That's true. But for some reason, God seems to think that we need our Blessed Mother because he's sending her. And I don't have a better idea than he does. And I think about, it is true, where did I learn that the Mass is great? Where did I learn about adoration? Where did I learn how to pray? Where did I learn about my faith? Our Lady taught me. She taught me. I went to her school. And so people, I think sometimes, me included, you get away from Medjugorje a little bit and you say, well, I don't want to talk about apparitions. They're not approved by the church. But what's amazing is when people go there, they're converted. When I give people literature on Medjugorje and the messages, their lives change. And so I would encourage you, don't be embarrassed of Medjugorje. Tell your friends. God is sending her. This is the greatest grace given on the earth right now for conversion, for faith. A couple of things. Yesterday's message. Pope Benedict is in Poland. Yesterday, May 26th, his message, right? He says, he's at the Shrine of Mary, Jasna in Poland, and he says, remain in Mary's school. And that's what Medjugorje is, I think. It's Our Lady's school. Can I share one more thing with you? My son Jeremy ordered a chalice, and he ordered it off the internet. And it's an antique chalice, a French chalice. He wanted something very beautiful that had images of Our Lady on it. And so he found it on the internet. A company in England had this. So they sent him pictures and they described it. So he phoned home and he said, Dad, I found the chalice I want. So I bought it. My family all chipped in. All my brothers and sisters, my parents, everybody chipped in for this chalice. And it got here. And on the bottom of the chalice was a date, December 22nd, the day my family became Catholic. I thought that was a nice little sign. One more little thing. Sometimes these little things, they may not be important to everybody. They're important to you. I hope that my sharing these things, you understand. My sister Teresa, remember I told you that she died? Well, my son Jeremy was given a picture by my dad the day he entered the seminary. He got on the plane to go. My father gave him a picture of my little sister Teresa, and he gave him a picture of Saint Therese, and he told Jeremy, you make sure you have these two people praying for you. Invoke their prayers, right? Well, I didn't know this, but my son Jeremy, every single day, he told me this since, says the rosary, and at the end, he invokes the prayers of my little sister that our family would remain Catholic, be strong Catholics. Well, anyway, his ordination date was changed by the bishop at the last minute, and he was really disappointed. So many people were going to be able to come, and now they can't come to the ordination. It's this June 18th. So he thought, well, there's a reason. Well, then his first Mass is scheduled the following day, June 19th. And remember how I told you that my sister, when she died, something was taken from our family? We just felt like something was missing. Well, his first Mass is June 19th, the day she died, 30 years ago. So, I felt like God was saying, there's a purpose. I have a purpose you have to trust. And I know I took something from you, and now I'm giving you something greater, for there will be many spiritual children through this. So I called Jeremy on the phone. We talked about this, and I said, Jeremy, I'm going to this conference in Notre Dame. What should I tell all these people? And he said, Dad, the only thing I can say from my perspective is tell them that my priesthood is a product of Medjugorje and Our Lady. Tell them that. So God bless all of you. Thank you.